Hello, everyone. We're glad that you can join us. Welcome to today's presentation, Managing Construction Administration on Your Project. Just a foreword before we get into the substance of our topic. This presentation is protected by U.S. and international copyright laws, so we ask that no listeners reproduce any information without written permission. And as a general disclaimer, the information provided today is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice. My name is Colleen Telling. A little bit about my background and what I do. I work with our Documents Committee to create and revise AIA contract documents and also write associated collateral. Prior to this role, I practiced municipal, business, contract, and real estate law at a private law firm in Cleveland, Ohio. Before my legal career, I worked in construction management and contract administration for Jacobs Engineering, where I was involved in heavy civil and infrastructure projects for public clients in Virginia. I also spent time working in project development for a residential design-build contractor. So with my background in construction and law, I will try to give you perspectives about construction administration from both of those viewpoints. The administrative aspects can make or break a construction project, and the key aspects that we'll discuss here are the project team roles, responsibilities, and collaboration, schedule, covering the construction schedule, schedule of values, and submittal schedule, overseeing the submittal, RFI, and change order process, and maintaining a safe, orderly job site. Throughout the presentation, I'll also note provisions that are helpful to include in your construction contract. So let's begin with part one concerning project team roles, responsibilities, and collaboration with a focus on the contractor. As a preliminary matter for the contractor's role, if the jurisdiction where the project is located requires you to be licensed, make sure that you are lawfully licensed. Even if a jurisdiction does not require contractors to be licensed, the lack of a license may limit your choice of insurance carriers, as some will not insure contractors who are unlicensed. Also, in jurisdictions where contractors are required to be licensed, those who aren't may be unable to file mechanics liens or initiate legal proceedings involving the project. One of many responsibilities of the contractor at the start of a project, and ideally prior to it, is to take any measurements at the project site, visit the site to become familiar with conditions, and compare your observations with the contract documents to verify any discrepancies. In doing so, if you find errors, omissions, or inconsistencies with the drawings or specs, these can be brought to the attention of the owner and architect or engineer, even the construction manager's advisor if one is on your project. Generally, owners appreciate the communication, being informed of any issues like this up front, and preventing bottlenecks down the road in terms of ordering materials, how the work is carried out, or time and cost changes. Another responsibility of the contractor is to designate a representative who will have authority to bind the contractor regarding the contract. Typically, this person is a project manager, but it could be the owner or superintendent. And a note of caution that if you're going to change the representative during the project, be sure to provide advance notice to the owner to help make a smooth transition. Throughout the project, the contractor and owner will collaborate a lot and exchange information. To that end, the contractor is entitled to rely on accurate information from the owner, and in turn, the owner is entitled to rely on accurate information from the contractor. Sustainability is an area where all project participants commonly collaborate, especially when a contractor is onboarded early. With sustainability initiatives, the contractor's perspective is critical because of its past experiences working with sustainable materials and systems, understanding lead times, and having an ability to identify potential challenges. Among other things, the contractor can also contribute to the owner's sustainability plan and provide insight on sustainable alternatives. A contractor is expected to comply with all laws, statutes, ordinances, rules, and regulations. These could be noise ordinances or special traffic routes for concrete trucks during large pours, especially if they coincide with rush hour traffic. And many jurisdictions regulate transportation of hazardous materials. So trucks may be required to have covers and or apply a spray to prevent material from flying out or to minimize odors. Concealed or unknown conditions are those that differ materially from conditions that might reasonably be assumed to exist at the site, such as encountering bedrock when none was expected. If you encounter subsurface or other concealed unknown conditions that differ materially from those that were indicated in the contract documents, notify the owner and or the architect engineer as soon as possible prior to disturbing the area, and always take pictures. If the difference between what the contractor could reasonably expect and what it finds is material to the work, a claim for additional cost and time would be appropriate. Now, to the extent that you can continue working in areas that are unaffected by differing site conditions, do so to minimize delays and cost. A contractor should only undertake delegated design when the contract documents require such professional services for part of the work. If you're asked to provide professional design services, be sure that the specs document all performance and design criteria. You're also entitled to rely on the performance and design criteria in the specs and other contract documents. In turn, the owner and architect or engineer can rely on this design. So be sure that an appropriately licensed design professional provides the services, as they have to sign and seal their design. For delegated design submittals, just be aware that the architect or engineer will only review them for conformance with the design parameters and the design concept. When you're obtaining insurance for the project, be sure that the insurer is licensed to do business in the jurisdiction where your project is located. The insurer should automatically volunteer this, but always verify at the start of your conversation. You will probably be asked to name the owner, architect, engineer as additional insureds on your commercial general liability or CGL policy, as well as any excess or umbrella liability policies. And this is to cover those parties in case there's a finding that the contractor committed a negligent act or omission during its work, which is a pretty standard request. CGL covers bodily injury, sickness, disease, death, and physical damage or destruction to tangible property. You should also carry insurance as required by your contract for the length of time that the contract dictates. If you become aware of an impending cancellation or expiration, notify the owner. At that point, the owner can stop the work until you cure the coverage lapse by procuring replacement coverage. And if you provided a certificate of insurance to the owner at the start of a job, the owner may be aware of the renewal date, and if it hasn't received a new certificate, will be prompted to inquire if your coverage has lapsed. Now, if you find yourself in the reverse situation where the owner is required to carry insurance, such as property insurance, but their coverage lapses, it's good to include language in your contract that requires them to notify you so you can delay starting the work or stop any work in progress and obtain insurance. When coverage has been obtained by the owner or you on their behalf, you can submit for an adjustment to the contract sum and time. When the owner obtains property insurance, it should be on a builder's risk, all risk completed value policy that covers the project on a replacement cost basis. The owner's property insurance coverage should be for the amount of the initial contract sum plus the value of subsequent changes. The owner should maintain property insurance at least until substantial completion. The owner would include the contractor as an insured on its builder's risk policy. Sometimes the owner requires the contractor to carry this. Typically, if the owner owns the land, they'll carry property insurance. In a situation where a builder owns a lot and is building a home for the client, then the contractor would carry builder's risk. You can also draft your contract to require that the owner and contractor exchange certificates of insurance as evidence that each party is carrying the required type and amount of insurance and for the appropriate duration. So what does builder's risk insurance cover? It covers direct physical loss or damage from things like fire, theft, vandalism, natural disasters, loss or damage from error, omission, or deficiency in construction methods, workmanship, or materials, damage to false work and other temporary structures, loss or damage to building systems from testing and startup, and debris removal. Other types of insurance that a contractor should carry are auto liability for company vehicles, workers' compensation, and employer's liability. There are other types of insurance that a contractor can carry, which are less common but may be needed based on the project and contractual requirements. And these are professional liability insurance. So if a contractor is undertaking professional design services, this would be needed. Pollution liability insurance for transporting, using, or releasing pollutants. Insurance to use or operate manned or unmanned aircraft. Railroad protective liability insurance if the work will cross or be within a certain distance of railroad tracks, or asbestos abatement liability insurance. Most importantly, don't begin work until the effective date that insurance starts. As I mentioned with insurers, you should confirm that your surety is licensed in the jurisdiction of your project. Now, 3 types of bonds to be aware of are bid bonds, performance bonds, and payment bonds. With a bid bond, the contractor assures the owner that if its bid is selected, the contractor will enter into a contract on the terms stated in the bid. If the contractor does not enter into the contract or fails to furnish the bond, then the amount of its bid security is forfeited to the owner. A performance bond is the contractor's assurance that it will perform the work for which it's hired. If a contractor cannot perform, then its surety will take over and complete the project. It is customary to issue a performance bond and bid bond simultaneously and pay one premium for both. Procuring one bond without the other generally will not reduce the premium. And a payment bond is an assurance by the contractor and its surety that labor and material bills for the construction contract will be paid. I would note that modifications that materially alter the scope of the contract should be submitted for approval to the surety, just to ensure that they will not be released from obligations by such changes. Another area of the construction project for the contractor to administer is allowances, which are included in the contract sum. So allowances are used when the finish or quality level of materials and equipment have not been selected at the time the contractor submits its bid or proposal, and so the cost can't be determined precisely. With regard to taxes, if the owner is a tax-exempt organization and intends to have its tax exemption applied to the contractor's work, then you shouldn't have to worry about paying sales, consumer use, and similar taxes for the work. Typically, the owner provides the contractor with a letter recognizing its tax-exempt status that the contractor can then present to suppliers and anyone else who would typically charge tax on materials. And costs that exceed or are less than an allowance would be reconciled with a change order. So let's talk now about the superintendent. The superintendent can bind the contractor and needs to be competent and experienced for the project. Often during the bidding or proposal phase, an owner will request the name of the contractor's superintendent along with a resume of qualifications and similar project experience. Once a superintendent is in place, the owner wants that person to remain until completion. However, the contractor may choose to relocate the superintendent to serve its business interest. Be aware that an owner may require notice before you change superintendents, as well as give its consent, just to discourage cycling through superintendents and losing each one's knowledge about the project. It's important that the superintendent direct the work with skill and attention. This would include, among other things, being able to plan, prioritize, organize, carry out a schedule, and coordinate manpower. Now, overseeing the different trades is a significant responsibility. If the contractor or any of its subcontractors perform an act or omission in the work, then the contractor is responsible. Much like the contractor, tradespeople need to be fit, qualified, and skilled to carry out the work for which they're hired. Another responsibility of the contractor is to inspect work to confirm that it is in proper condition or determine if it needs rework. and supplying enough properly skilled workers and materials. As-built are very important to keep up with throughout construction. Often the superintendent is in the best position to maintain these, but a project engineer may assist or have full responsibility for them. Details to record include final elevations, change orders, construction change directives, RFIs, and submittals. When complete, the as-built can be turned over to governmental authorities if required, as well as to the owner as part of final project closeout. Test and inspections. It is the contractor's responsibility to arrange for test and inspections with an independent testing lab. If tests show a failure, like a low concrete break that requires removing and replacing the concrete, costs for that rework and retesting are at the contractor's expense. You want to include cost for test and inspections in your bid or proposal. If additional tests are required by the owner, architect, engineer, CMA, or public authority, then those tests should be arranged by the contractor but paid for by the owner. It's a good practice to include a set of drawings and specs at the project site for everyone's easy reference. It sounds simple enough, but isn't always done. And along with these, include change orders, construction change directives, approved submittals, and RFIs. And if these can't be left in paper form, an alternative would be to provide electronic copies to the tradesman. When putting together your contract with subcontractors, it's a good idea to include a flow-down provision to the effect that terms and conditions in the owner-contractor agreement, also known as the prime contract, flow down to the contractor-subcontractor agreement. Examples would be payment terms, safety obligations, professional design services, and procedures for handling hazardous materials. Know that if the owner reserves the right to assess liquidated damages against the contractor for failing to meet the schedule, the contractor can also assess LDs against the sub to the extent the sub is responsible for delay. Also, when you include flow-down language, attach a copy of the prime contract. You can redact any confidential information to properly inform the sub of the flow-down provisions. Additionally, the contractor may also require its subs to enter into the same type of agreement containing a flow-down clause with its subcontractors. And much like informing the owner of who the superintendent is, the contractor should also notify the owner about who the subcontractors are for major portions of the work. The same should apply for those supplying materials or equipment for a special design. Just as the contractor must coordinate with the owner for various aspects of the construction project, the contractor must also coordinate with the subcontractor. This includes sharing the contractor's construction and submittal schedules, as well as any subsequent changes with the subs. Coordinating construction schedules then helps avoid conflicts or interference between each party's work. Additionally, the contractor needs to review and return the submittals in a timely manner. Separate contractors. In sequencing construction activities, part of your work may depend on the owner or one of its separate contractors completing an operation or portion of construction. To properly execute your activity and prior to undertaking it, verify that there are no discrepancies or defects in their construction that will affect your work. If you notice defects or discrepancies, notify the owner and architect or engineer prior to proceeding with your work. Otherwise, it could be viewed as your acknowledgement that their work is fit and proper for you to do your work. The owner must compensate the contractor for costs that the contractor incurs because of a separate contractor's delays, improperly timed activities, damage to work, or defective construction. Know that this can work in reverse to the extent that if you cause delays, improperly timed activities, or have defective construction on which others depend to complete their work, then you're responsible for the resulting cost that the owner or separate contractor incur. Claims and disputes. This is probably everyone's least favorite section of a contract and one that can be easily glossed over in the hope that the parties will never have a claim or dispute. However, it is a crucial topic that deserves attention, as many projects do have claims. Now, a simple definition of a claim is a contractor's assertion for payment. It could also be a change to the contract time or some other relief regarding the contract. As claims arise, it's important to continue performing work while resolution of the claim is pending, and it's also important to continue being paid for work performed. So there are a few paths to formally resolving a claim, namely mediation, arbitration, and litigation in the courts. Mediation is not binding, but it can be a condition precedent to binding dispute resolution, which would be arbitration or litigation. The big reasons why parties choose mediation is because it's the most cost-effective option and the fastest way to resolve a dispute. Mediations are typically conducted by neutral institutions, such as by representatives from the American Arbitration Association, or AAA. Procedurally, you can file a request for mediation at the same time as a demand for arbitration, select arbitrators, and agree on a schedule for arbitral proceedings. Usually, a concurrent filing like this is done in anticipation that mediation won't resolve a dispute and in an effort to minimize time awaiting an arbitration proceeding. As a fair way to apportion cost, the most recognized way is for the parties to share the mediator's fee and any filing fees equally. Ideally, mediation is held in the place where the project is located because most project participants are there. So I mentioned that mediation is not binding, and that means that if one party has a change of heart after mediation concludes, it can choose not to abide by the mediation settlement agreement. If that happens, the other party can enforce the settlement agreement in court. And as a point of clarification, there is no appeal of a mediation outcome because it's a negotiated agreement between the parties and not a ruling made by an independent fact finder. The mediators are there to guide the parties' discussions and lead them to an eventual agreement. Now, if the parties do not resolve their dispute by mediation, or if they go straight to arbitration, this too can be administered by the AAA. There are different rules that can be applied, such as commercial arbitration rules and consumer arbitration rules under AAA. But for a construction project, the contract should specify the construction industry arbitration rules and mediation procedures. As I mentioned with mediation, ideally you want to conduct arbitration in the jurisdiction where the project is located, but the parties can choose a different location if they mutually agree. When filing a demand for arbitration, be sure to assert all claims that you want to resolve. An arbitration award is final and binding, meaning that the final decision cannot be appealed within the arbitral institution or to a court. However, like mediation, the final decision can be enforced in a court that has jurisdiction. One point to note, because this does come up in practice, if the parties in their contract agreed to arbitration as their form of binding dispute resolution, but disregard it and file their claim in court, a judge will not hear the case, but will compel the parties to resolve their dispute via arbitration in accordance with their contract. The other option for binding dispute resolution is litigation in the courts. Of the three options, mediation, arbitration, and litigation, this is the most expensive and will take the longest amount of time to receive a final decision. However, it does afford you the option of appealing a ruling. The AIA A201 general conditions provide strong language to help a contractor who's navigating the area of termination. So I'll paraphrase just a few provisions from A201. Section 14.1 states that a contractor can terminate the contract if work has been stopped for 30 consecutive days when that is not the fault of the contractor or its subs, due to a court or other public authority with jurisdiction issuing a stop work order. I'm sure a few of those have circulated since COVID began. Also an act of government, like a declaration of national emergency that requires work to stop, or the architect not issuing a certificate for payment and not notifying the contractor of its reason for withholding certification. When negotiating a termination provision in your owner contract, it's a good idea to require a termination fee in case the owner terminates the agreement for its convenience. Ultimately, if you're unable to have the owner agree to this, it can still be raised as a bargaining chip in the back and forth negotiations. So let's assume that you and the owner have worked out any claims and disputes. Neither of you terminated the contract, and the project is now at the substantial completion phase. This occurs when the work is sufficiently complete so the owner can occupy or use the work for its intended purpose. At that time, the contractor should prepare and submit to the owner, architect, engineer, or CMA a comprehensive punch list prior to final payment. Now, one or all of the aforementioned parties should visit the project site to determine if there are other items to add to the list. Once they have made their site inspection, it's a good idea for the contractor to arrange a meeting with them to review their list, vet any things that aren't really punch list items, and add their legitimate items to the punch list. The cost for addressing items on the punch list and correcting any work are part of the contractor's expenses. When the architect or engineer prepares a certificate of substantial completion, it establishes the date of substantial completion, responsibilities of the owner and contractor in terms of security, heat, insurance, any damage to the work, and the time within which the contractor is to finish its punch list items. Thereafter, the owner can release retainage and make any adjustments for incomplete work or work that doesn't comply with the contract documents. Substantial completion is also the trigger to begin the warranty period. Typically, contractors warrant their overall work for 1 year from substantial completion. And when you bid a job, you should also include a certain amount of money in your bid allotted to warranty work. So when you're at final completion, the contractor is to notify the owner, architect, engineer, CMA as appropriate, that punch list items are complete and ready for final inspection, as well as submit its final pay-app. From there, your final pay-app will be reviewed, and upon satisfactory findings will be approved. The primary responsibilities of the contractor at this point are to submit an affidavit that payrolls and bills for materials and equipment have been paid, a certificate evidencing that insurance required by the contract will remain in force after final payment, a consent of surety, if any, to final payment, documentation of any special warranties, and these could be manufacturer's warranties or specific subcontractor warranties, and any other data establishing payment or satisfaction of obligations. And these could be receipts, releases, and waivers of liens arising out of the contract. There are certain things the contractor needs to warrant at the completion of its work, and these are that the materials and equipment furnished are new and of good quality. This general warranty is in addition to other warranties like those received from product manufacturers that the contractor forwards to the owner. Another warranty is that work is in accordance with the drawings and specifications and is free from defects. There are some typical items excluded from a contractor's warranty, and these include abuse and alterations to work that was not executed by the contractor, improper or insufficient maintenance, improper operation, normal wear and tear, and normal usage. So now we will move on to the second part of the presentation, which is the construction schedule, schedule of values, and submittal schedule. The schedule that owners are very interested in receiving at the start of a job is the construction schedule. Owners like to see activities broken out in detail so they can understand approximate dates for major activities. It's also helpful for their internal coordination, especially in a manufacturing or industrial facility where the owner's employees need to shut down certain lines for the contractor to perform work and make tie-ins. Often with these, the owner's personnel have to plan days in advance of a shutdown to reroute their system's activities. A detailed schedule also aids the contractor in organizing its work and makes it easier to justify progress payments when the owner inquires about actual steps of the work that are complete. Also, if there is a CMA on the project, they are definitely going to require a detailed schedule breakdown. So what kind of details should appear on the construction schedule? You'll want to detail orderly progression of the work within the allotted contract time. Also include the date of commencement of the work, interim milestone dates, and substantial completion. Refer to your contract to determine if substantial completion is designated as the number of calendar days from commencement or as a specific date. You can further refine substantial completion by portions of the work and revise the schedule as project conditions dictate. Be sure to include the time required to complete each portion of the work. Time is of the essence means that timely performance is an express condition of the contract, and any delay in the owner's or contractor's performance constitutes a breach of contract. Now, you don't need to address this on your schedule, but do pay attention to liquidated damages in your contract, as these will be assessed if you fail to meet substantial completion within the contract time. Schedule of values. For fixed price or guaranteed maximum price contracts, the contractor will likely be required to submit a schedule of values before the first pay-up. A schedule of values allocates the entire contract sum to the various portions of the work. The contractor will need to show the percentage of completion for each activity as of the end of the period covered by the application for payment. The schedule of values is then used as a basis for reviewing the contractor's monthly pay applications. Changes to the schedule of values should be supported by data to substantiate its accuracy. A reason that you may be requested to provide supporting data is to verify that the schedule is not front-loaded. Verification will probably be requested when the numbers look inflated for work that's to be done early in the construction process. Now, prior to submitting the actual pay-app, it is good practice to submit an itemized pay-app about a week in advance that assigns the percentage of work and corresponding dollar value that is projected to be complete by the actual submission date. So if your agreed upon date to submit monthly pay-apps is the 5th of the month, you might submit the itemized pay-app around the 25th of the prior month. Also be sure to account for any retainage. A release of liens form is the contractor's certification that it has paid all employees, subs, suppliers, and any others who performed work or provided equipment and materials during the pay-app period. This way, they cannot place a lien, a security interest, or claim against you, the owner, or the owner's lender for unpaid amounts. After you have submitted your pay-app, the owner, architect, engineer, or CMA who is reviewing it certifies the full amount for payment, will pay another amount as they deem is proper, along with reasons for withholding part of the certification, or they will withhold the entire amount along with the reason, hopefully not too often though. Common reasons for not certifying a pay-app are defective work that hasn't been remedied, the contractor didn't pay subs for labor, materials, or equipment, evidence that work can't be completed for the unpaid balance of the contract sum, damage to the owner or a separate contractor, reasonable evidence that work won't be completed within the contract time, and the unpaid balance is inadequate to cover actual or liquidated damages, or repeated failure to carry out the work according to the contract documents. Applications for payment are to include only amounts for the work that the contractor intends to make payment. So if you're not intending to pay a subcontractor or material supplier, don't include their invoiced amount on the pay app. Just as the construction schedule should be submitted to the owner, the architect or engineer and CMA, if there is one, after contract award, so too should the submittal schedule. The submittal schedule is literally a list by spec section and chronological numbering, as well as a name of all submittals required by the specifications. After the architect, engineer, CMA review the schedule, they will inform the contractor of any submittals missing from the list. Sometimes they will ask the contractor to provide submittals that are not called for in the specs. Generally, things like a copy of the contractor's safety plan, certification of crane assembly, certification of the crane operator, and records that employees have undergone safety training, especially in road and traffic safety. It's important to include the submittal schedule on the construction schedule, as time must be accounted for when submittals are submitted, the review period, and sequencing of these dates with installation. Include applicable time for the architect or engineer to review submittals and comment. Usually the specs will define a review time as 14 to 28 days. Always submit submittals in accordance with the approved submittal schedule to avoid delays to your work, the owner's activities, or any work being performed by the owner's other contractors. Now let's continue the discussion of submittals as well as overseeing the RFI and change order process. And the purpose of submittals is to illustrate how the contractor intends to implement the design. By submitting shop drawings, product data, and samples, the contractor is representing that it reviewed and approved them, determined that they're consistent with other materials, measurements, and field construction criteria, and checked and coordinated information in the submittals with the contract documents. Also, a contractor should not proceed with performing any work that depends on approval of a submittal when that approval is outstanding. If a submittal has been returned for correction and resubmission, it is likely that the architect or engineer will only check previously noted items to see if they have been corrected. So if you are resubmitting a submittal that contains changes the architect or engineer wouldn't be looking for, be sure to call attention to that in your resubmittal. Don't assume that it will be seen and that the entire submittal will be re-reviewed. For informational submittals, the architect or engineer is not expected to take responsive action. Anytime after contract award and before final completion, it may be necessary for a contractor to submit a request for information or RFI when it discovers an error, omission, or inconsistency in the specs or drawings. The architect or engineer will review the request in the time allotted by the contract and provide a written response with clarification or direction on how to proceed. If necessary, the architect or engineer will also issue supplemental specifications and or drawings along with that RFI. Now, should the RFI response create cost or time impacts, the contractor can submit a claim. A simple project may only have a couple dozen RFIs, but a complex project could have thousands. Now, this goes a little bit toward collaboration, but if you identify a problem at the site or a discrepancy on the drawings that lead you to submit an RFI, Consider proposing a solution with the question if you're comfortable doing so. When I worked as a CM, there were times when our team of project managers and inspectors, also the owner and architect, didn't have as good a solution as our contractors proposed. Oftentimes, contractors have solutions that don't occur to other project stakeholders by virtue of seeing conditions in the field, previously encountering them, or knowing about alternative products or supplies. Traditionally, owners expect their architect or engineer to come up with a solution, but I think one way to have a strong contractor-owner collaborative relationship is taking steps like this, which shows the contractor is invested in the project and looking for a desirable outcome for the owner. Now, proposing a solution may trigger a substitution, so be sure it is then documented with a change order. Changes to the work can occur in a few ways, such as a change order, a construction change directive, or a minor change in the work. Regardless of which of the three you're presented with, the expectation is that the contractor will proceed promptly with changes in the work. For a change order to be executed, there must be agreement among the owner, architect or engineer, and the contractor. The change order will describe the change to the work, any increase or decrease in cost, and any increase or decrease to the contract time. When determining the cost increase, it's appropriate to include overhead and profit. This also applies for a cost decrease. Note that even if the contract sum or time remain unchanged, this fact should be recorded by indicating a no net change on the change order. This helps avoid disputes as to whether an adjustment to the contract sum or time was intended, particularly if such changes were suggested by the contractor. A construction change directive, or CCD, may be used when there's limited time or disagreement regarding cost and time. There only needs to be agreement by the owner. When the parties agree on a cost and or time adjustment, a change order is issued to document that. If the parties only agree on a cost and time for part of the work under the CCD, a change order can be issued for that portion. When those amounts are settled and you've performed a portion of that work, you can request payment for the completed work. And a minor change in the work can be issued by the architect or engineer alone. Minor changes do not carry a cost or time increase or decrease. General causes for a time extension would be an act or neglect of the owner, architect, engineer, or separate contractor, a change ordered in the work, labor disputes, unusual delay in deliveries, also kind of follows along with the COVID pandemic, adverse weather conditions, or other causes beyond the contractor's control. Also, it could be any other causes that the contractor asserts justified delay. So a safe, orderly job site may be the final topic and the shortest, but it is critical to every step of the construction process. The contractor has overall responsibility for the construction site and in particular is responsible for initiating, maintaining, and supervising all safety precautions for the project. The contractor should appoint a designated site safety rep. This could be the superintendent, a foreman, or a designated safety officer. It may also be the same person as the designated rep for the project. Depending on the owner, the size of the project, and the number of construction personnel, there may be a requirement that the site safety rep be OSHA 10, 30, or 40 hours certified. Furthermore, the contractor is to take responsible safety precautions to prevent damage, injury, or loss to employees, work, materials, and equipment, and any other property at or adjacent to the site. This could be vegetation, pavement, and utilities that should not be disturbed. As part of reasonable safety precautions, I would add that no part of the construction site should be loaded in such a way that it creates an unsafe condition or causes damage. Depending on the types of hazards, a safeguard may be to post danger or other warning signs. And if someone on the site sustains an injury or there's damage to property, promptly offer medical assistance to the person or stabilize the property. Then notify the owner or architect, engineer, CMA with details about the incident. You'll also want to document the event in writing as well as the follow-up action. So there can be a variety of unexpected hazards on a project site, and these can range from contaminated soils to finding a group of venomous snakes in your work area, both of which I experienced on past projects. If you encounter an unexpected hazardous condition, material, or substance during the work, don't try to handle or remove it, as it could endanger the health, safety, and welfare of your field personnel. Instead, stop the work and notify the owner, architect, engineer, or CMA. If it seems like it'll take time to investigate the hazardous condition, the contractor can issue a formal notice that it's stopping work due to the unexpected condition. The contractor can issue a formal notice that, pending further direction by the owner or architect, it will not proceed. And this can help substantiate a request for a time extension as well as additional cost of shutdown, delay, and startup. Now, not all situations necessarily require stopping the work. Some are temporary delays to the tune of an hour or so. As an example, I worked at a plant where the owner's personnel accidentally released liquid polymer on the floor, which made the surface very slippery for the contractor working in the immediate vicinity. It was also somewhat of a breathing hazard, and there were risks of contamination to skin and eyes. In that case, the contractor lost a few hours of work until the owner cleaned it up. So usually small setbacks like this can be absorbed easily as the contractor can address other non-critical work during the interim. Lastly, evaluate job site safety relative to construction means, methods, techniques, sequences, and procedures. If you determine that contract-specific instructions regarding these areas are unsafe, definitely notify the owner, architect, engineer, or CMA and propose an alternative. And that brings us to our contact and resources page. If you'd like to follow up with any questions, please contact the email and phone numbers shown here. And thank you so much for joining this presentation. I hope that it's been informative and provided insight into how to make the administrative side of your project as successful as the construction side. Thank you.